This lesson is a political cartoon analysis, and the purpose of this lesson is twofold. The first purpose is to delve a little deeper into a robber baron and to look at some primary sources or things created at the time and analyze them. The second goal here is to fit that analysis into the bigger scope and sequence of the Industrial Revolution. So today I'm going to walk you through this political cartoon analysis. We already looked at one in the last lesson with the octopus and Rockefeller, but today our subject is going to be Andrew Carnegie. So anything that I am referring to is from this lecture here, but also from the previous lecture, which we just did, where we looked at several robber barons. So some of the information that I'm drawing from is from that also. Captains of industry or robber barons. This is giving us some historical context. So, over the course of the late 1800s, entrepreneurs like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan helped to shape the growth of American industry. Some people saw them as captains of industry because they were inventive, hardworking, and led the way in rise of American business. Others saw them as robber barons because they were ruthless and self centered entrepreneurs whose aggressive business practices destroyed the smaller competitors and drove many companies out of business. So that's some context there. We discussed some other details, and I'll draw upon that throughout this lecture. So let's just take a quick revisit of Andrew Carnegie. So during this time, Congress rarely made any laws to regulate or control business practices. It was that laissez faire economics. This atmosphere of freedom encouraged the growth of what became known as big business. Entrepreneurs formed giant corporations and monopolies. A monopoly is a company that controls most or all of the businesses in a particular industry. One of these giants of business was Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie worked his way up in the railroad business. He then entered the growing steel industry. Slowly, Carnegie gained control of every step of the steelmaking process. His company owned iron mines, steel mills, railroads, and shipping lines. This is vertical integration. In 1892, he combined all of these businesses into the giant Carnegie Steel Company. It produced more steel than all the mills in England combined. In later years, he donated much of his wealth to education by funding thousands of libraries throughout the U.S. and United Kingdom. Carnegie once said, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." So, a snapshot of his good and bad, his hero or villain, captain of industry. He increased the production of steel or mass production through the Bessemer process, which we learned about in, I think it was module 2.1. He was a philanthropist. He donated money to educational facilities like libraries, Carnegie Hall, Carnegie Mellon University. He was a robber baron or a villain in that he had a monopoly of the steel industry. He could increase prices because he had no competitors, which was corrupt. He was gouging the American public. Um, he vertically integrated, which meant he controlled all the steps of the industry and steel to drive out competition. So while J.D. Rockefeller bought all oil refineries so no one else could refine oil, what Carnegie did was he bought out all of the major steps along the way to producing and distributing steel. So, on to our document. This is a political cartoon. The subject is Andrew Carnegie. You can see it says his name here. And on this side, it says, notice, wages reduced, 20% cut, and there's a worker looking up at him, $sign on this box. So he's standing on, probably a box of money here. On this side, he's handing out money to people holding up their hands. This is Scotland, which is the country he was originally from. That's where he was born. He had a great estate there. And then this is a library that he's handing to Pittsburgh. That was the location, or just outside of Pittsburgh, was where his steel company was. And it says 40 millionaire Carnegie in his great double role. As the tight fisted employer, he reduces wages that he may play philanthropist and give away libraries, etc. So the central theme here is he's cutting wages. So the general, worker at his company is working hard, working in unsafe conditions for very little pay, and he's using those profits to give away things to other people. So that's where that double person comes in, or sometimes we may call it two-faced. So now we're going to look at some questions, and these are not easy questions, so I'm going to model how to do them. And again, this is what I'm doing is considered an exemplar. And I know that when you try to do this, you're going to do a wonderful job, but you're going to grow in it. Okay, so when I show you in this lecture how to do this, don't think you have to do exactly what I do, but I'm going to show you the basics of what you need to do afterwards. So it says to briefly describe one historical situation in the United States during the Second Industrial Revolution suggested by the image. So when I look at this, I'm seeing that robber baron versus captain of industry. But what I have to do is I have to provide context first. So the first thing you want to do is write a sentence about the Industrial Revolution and how it relates to this image. So I'm going to say during the Industrial Revolution, a group of leading industrialists made names for themselves for their business sense and practicality, and for accumulating vast wealth quickly through these business practices. And again, this is my writing and my language and my voice. I expect you to have it in your voice, okay? So what I did was I picked up on what was going on in the greater context during the Industrial Revolution. There's a leading group of industrialists that made names for themselves in their business sense, for their business sense and practicality, and for accumulating vast amounts of wealth through these business practices. So I'm going to go on to introduce this idea of who Carnegie is. These industrialists such as J.P. Morgan, J.D. Rockefeller, and the subject, the cartoon, Andrew Carnegie, were often debated on whether they were captains of industry or robber barons. This image shows both sides of Carnegie, one as paying low wages to his worker, making him a robber baron, and the other as taking those profits and giving away his fortune to the American and Scottish public. Okay, so as you can see there, I didn't have to write a ton. I really have 1, to 3 long sentences, but what I did do was I explained. Explain is giving reason and cause. So when you write a short answer question like this, you have to make sure that you're putting in the necessary details that show that you are making the connection to the question. Okay, so that's an example of an exemplar for this. Again, I expect that you have your own voice and your own writing style, but there is a formula to this where you want to make sure that you are linking it back. So let's take a look at the second question. Briefly explain how one specific event or development in this period led to the situation in this image. So for my answer, and again, there's no one right answer. This is how I interpreted the cartoon. You may find like, oh, I wouldn't have argued that. I think I would have argued this instead of what Mrs. Shepard argued. That's totally okay, as long as you can provide reason and evidence. So in this next question, where it's asking a specific development or from this period that led to this situation, where you see this two-person Carnegie, what I focused on was one specific. Do you see how I'm using the prompt in my answer? Event that developed in this era from led from this era, developed in this era that led to this situation of two Carnegies in the cartoon was the Homestead strike. Okay, now you don't have to go back and give tons of details from the strike. When we did our graphic organizer, we really focused on the date, where it was, the cause, and the result. So that's really all you need to focus on in here. So I'm going to say in workers went on strike to protest low wages and unsafe working conditions. Carnegie's manager sent Pinkerton detectives to break up the strike, which resulted in violence, injury, and even strike leaders were charged with murder, treason, or blacklisted. At the end of the strike, workers returned to the Homestead Company with the same wages and no union for the next 40 years. This event is demonstrated in the cartoon with Carnegie notifying workers that wages would be cut. This also provides evidence that Carnegie was a robber baron, baron, in that he was corrupt in paying his workers little to increase profits for his, we'll say, discretion, because even though he gave it away, he was deciding who should get the money. Okay, so again, I tie it to that picture. So I talk about a specific event that relates to this picture, even though it doesn't say anywhere in here homestead strike. We know that the homestead strike is about this wage cut and this abolishment of the sliding scale. But I have to make inferences here. And I give a little bit of background on what happened at the homestead strike and how it resulted in no wage increase and no union for the next 40 years. And then I also tie it back to this idea of robber barons and captains of industry. Now, the last question here is briefly explain how one specific event or development in the period resulted from the historical situation suggested by the image. So, I'm going to go back to the readings that we did yesterday with some of the documents, and it talked a bit about how Andrew Carnegie wound up selling Carnegie Steel and spending the rest of his life as a philanthropist. So I'm going to say one development that resulted from this era is that Carnegie, oops, I can't, is that Carnegie sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for $480 million. You don't have to remember that. I obviously am working with notes right here. And spent the rest of his life as a philanthropist. Great. As a philanthropist, he gifted the public with libraries, Carnegie Hall, and Carnegie Mellon University. For generations to benefit long after he was gone. In his book, The Gospel of Wealth, and again, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have everything right in front of me, Carnegie says it is the responsibility of the wealthy to give away their money in philanthropic endeavors, which provides evidence that he is a hero and not a villain. And that's it. So again, I find an event that resulted, and I can say, like here, he's got, the robber baron, he's cutting wages, but he's giving the money away. And again, one of the results here is his wealth gave things to people, particularly educational endeavors like libraries, universities, Carnegie Hall, etc. So that's how you do a short answer question. And this is something that we'll do occasionally towards the end of the unit. Like we're at the end of the unit, we're having a test later this week, and you should expect to see something like this and have these types of questions where you can talk about the context of the Industrial Revolution and how it relates to this image and what developments are being portrayed in the cartoon, what maybe cause this cartoon to be um, created, and maybe what might have resulted from it. And there are really no wrong answers if you can defend them and they are related to the subject matter. So, again, make sure you explain, use part of the prompt in your writing. And I expect it, like I said, in your own voice. What I'm showing you here is an exemplar. Remember, I've studied history for many, many years. So, what I may make seem easy is not always easy, but this is something that we're going to continue to grow in. I don't expect perfection, I expect growth. And with that, I am going to close out. Make sure that if you need to go back and take notes down on your paper, that you do so, and you can hit pause at any time. Thank you.